So we have on ichingsystems.net website a nice little ebook on what drives your sexual engine.
We do.
And the answer could be love, control, distance, or release. Could you address that a little bit for our viewers?
Sure. And again, I'd say that that's like at least a 20-year process to find what we have in that little booklet that I think is fun to read. And you know what it really comes down to? The bottom line of that book is when you're hot, and when you're not, you're not.
Oh.
And what I mean by that is that people have sexual compatibilities. That is, there are certain people that you're sexually compatible with and certain people that you're not. And I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, there was an incredible assumption that everybody was sexually compatible with everybody else. I mean, you married someone, so you were expected to have sex with that person for however long the rest of your life that you were married to the person. But nobody said, you might not be hot with that person, or, you're only going to have sexual compatibility with certain people. Anyway, we found these 4 different characteristics. First one is physical, active, and sexual active, and that one is a person who's looking for release from the tension that goes with sex. And that doesn't imply that the person is going around town, working their way through the city because they have sexual tension. It's just a natural condition where the person builds up tension and looks for release. The second condition is non-sexual active, and that's a person who really needs love connected with their sexual situations and sexual relationships. And this is a person who really needs to be told and felt that they are loved as a part of their sexual relationship with another person. And then the third one is sexual inactive. And this is a person who has sexual energy and is interested in sex, but usually has an internal need to be able to spend some time alone after they've had a sexual encounter. So they need some distance. They have sex, but then they need some distance. So this is the person who, has a great sexual encounter and then wants to go get a cup of coffee and doesn't necessarily want to roll over and be lovey all night. And there's nothing wrong with this person. It's just a person who needs that space to regroup inside and find themselves. And then the last one is non-sexual inactive. And this is a person who generally needs to have a certain amount of control over their life. Now, I know in mental health, if you say the word control, they think, oh, controlling, mentally ill, cuckoo. But I don't mean it like that. I mean control, like being in charge of. And so this is a person for whom sex has a certain amount of control in it. And these people probably are the least interested in sex. Not that they never have sex, but sex once in a while is satisfying and enriching enough for the person of this type. And the key for this person is to discover what they actually can and can't control. Like ultimately the only thing you can control is yourself. And so the person who's a control type has to be careful not to try to control his or her partner. Otherwise they can end up with a challenging relationship, to say the least.
The control aspect, in other words, if we see someone who is very controlling and wants to control a lot of pieces in their life and other people's life, would we right away say, hey, they're probably non-sexual inactive?
Maybe, but you have to also account for damage and harm that's done to people and things that people do to compensate for that damage and harm. Like when people are growing up, most people, greater than 70% of people, end up sacrificing something that they really need in order to survive childhood. So they live in a coping or survival mode. Once you begin to live in a coping or survival mode, then you are already in a compensation situation in your life. In other words, you're not coming from a natural place anymore. So a person, for instance, who grows up in a family where there's aggressive talk or even violent behavior might become controlling, but not be that type sexually, just trying to protect themselves from something that happened in their family.
I also wonder about the distance and the love people, because it seems like that's the worst combo.
it's a difficult combination, because the love people really need somebody to roll over and cuddle up and say, I love you. And the distance people need to go take a walk. And sometimes I think people can understand that about themselves. And when they do, make space for one another to be the way they are and compensate and maybe make it work. But if you're not conscious of that, you could say, well, you're so insensitive after we have sex, you just want to get up and walk away, you know, and start something that actually isn't, the person isn't trying to be insensitive at all. The person is just being the way they are.
And it seems like the release and the control characteristics are the most difficult.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. They're the least likely to have a hot, passionate relationship. They're more likely to have a relationship where they get together a few times a year.
So is it possible that they would have more sex than that? Is it really the control person that really controls?
Well, the control person isn't that interested.
So the person who is interested can't change that no matter what?
No.
I mean, there's nothing they can...
No.
No, of course not. This is a system. We're just trying to figure out how we are.
How we are, yeah. And the thing about, you know, therapy is that I think the best thing that can come out of counseling and therapy for people is to discover how they are rather than change the other person or try to expend energy changing another person, because it just doesn't happen. We are what we are, you know.
Are we born this way?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. And I certainly think there's an amount of environmental influence, but there's just a kind of and probably we could say that we could find those things in an astrology chart as well. You know, we can find astrology charts that have a lot of built-in tension in them, and astrology charts that are really flat, that don't have any kind of tension built into them or have limited tension in them. And that would apply to a person's sex life for sure.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. Really is interesting. It's All About Relationships by Mary Miller, internationally. Really, internationally. Isn't that exciting?
Yes, it is. It's really exciting. It's really exciting because we now have this book in French and Spanish. So people in Latin countries can read this. When we go over to Europe, we have people in France and in Switzerland who have this book in French and just love it. So it's been great for us.
Exciting.